thank you for inviting me here. It's a bit emotional for me as well to be here in your city and to be here in Juneau and trying to tell you what I've been doing the last 20 years is a big thing, but I'll try to tell you something what I'm doing like every day in the office. So I will tell you a little bit about our methods and what we do, and then about the projects we do. So I live in Stockholm, in Sweden, which is kind of 1/3 up in Sweden. It's a quite long country, so we're probably about your height, I think, in latitude. And I live in a house. This is actually my house here. I live there with my 2 daughters who are 18 and 15. I have a wife who's always been running a more successful business than I am. They're always slightly bigger than our office. So being a bit oppressed by the women in my life, it's so nice to be here and get out of that a bit and stand on my own 2 legs with my own friends. Just kidding. But since they've been growing up, of course, my children, I also nurtured my other family, our practice, Kjellander Sjo. And we started in 1998, so we just celebrated 20 years, which is it's actually quite rewarding, but it's also a bit frightening that we've been doing this for so long. And we are a bit single-minded, so we just like to get up every day and do the same thing all over with new projects, but still working towards the same goals. So these drawings here are projects we've been working on, and we've been fortunate to go to all these different places and investigate different places, what makes them special, and try to add on to them and improve them and make them work. And this is also like a fictional street through them that connects them. And I think if there's one thing we are really working a lot with, it's streets. I mean, streets are the most fundamental and important to us feature in a city, that the street works. It's something you have just outside your door, and it can connect everybody, like all people, with each other and with other people. And I would say also a thing we really are busy with, and that we're all busy with, is the challenge we face right now. We have a common threat, and that's really to try to keep our planet safe and a safe environment for all of us. So climate change and how we can tackle it as architects and urban designers is really one thing that keeps us going. And the question is, so as architects, what can we do right here, right now? It's not an easy question, and I don't know even why am I an architect. I think for me, the older I get, I'm getting a bit tired of architecture. For me, it's not as important anymore to do nice details and do buildings that will do this or that or express things. For me, it's much more interesting and rewarding to try to work, as I said, with cities and the connections between people, and how people can be enabled to live their lives and do whatever they want to do, and create activity in urban situation. But what can we do right now? Because it is quite urgent and quite pressing. I don't know if you know who this is, where I was. Yes, please.
Greta Thunberg?
Yeah. So Greta is a 16-year-old in Sweden that was heavily emotionally affected by thinking about climate change. And I think she did what we all should do. She was like the grown-up or the parent alone in the house who actually said something about climate change at the United Nations and at the European Union. And people listened to her, and so she's on Climate Strike, as you know, every Friday, which I think is great. And there's like thousands or hundreds of thousands followers, which I think is really good. And we should listen more to that. I mean, we have this pressing issue, and for me, she's really somebody to admire. But how can we respond to that in our occupation? I mean, of course, we know that the built environment and what we build every day is a big part of climate change, but maybe also more than that, it's what we do, the buildings we do and the cities we do really carry a lot of the answers to the problems with climate change. Not all, but a great deal of them, I would say. We could do, for instance, try to use architecture for what it really does best. I mean, to allow people to construct things and build societies and do things that they need. We did this design for Burkina Faso for a new school in Africa, and we didn't do that much. I mean, we did some drawings, and the people here changed his designs and drawings a lot, but they still used them somehow and made them better, I think. And they did this school from clay and local materials using methods that they knew. Not very trained labor, but the result I think was fantastic. They now have a school, and they will do the second one in the next village. So like, if architecture can really be necessary and like solving things and improving issues, that's what it should really be about. So we do urban design, and we do storytelling, and I think storytelling is important because it changes the way people read their own situation and their own lives. It can improve like a place. It could be the key to how to change a place or a community. And placemaking is, of course, to make meaningful places that we all like and enjoy. And of course, the difficult thing is to keep this, what we do, within the planetary boundaries. We know that the Stockholm Resilience Center was one that early put up these 9 boundaries for the planet that would keep us safe and the planet safe, and keep it safe for coming generations. And we know that 2 of these 9 boundaries are kind of out of control, and that means that it's a high risk, and we don't know what's going to happen when these 2 systems have failed, if we can repair them, or if it's unrepairable. But things we can work with, themes as architects, could be to create flexible and adaptive structures that are not only used for one thing, but for many things. We know that the climate is changing, so also the city structures need to be adaptive and flexible. If we can reveal the potential of resources, space, and society, what does that mean? I mean, it needs to like really focus on the resources we use. We're not likely to get any new resources. What we have is now within this atmosphere or stratosphere that we have. If we don't get hit by a new comet, we won't get any new stuff. And we make buildings and cars and everything from stuff that is quite precious and limited, and we don't want to put them in a land dump where we can't use them, because then we are running out of resources. And of course, we all know about cradle to cradle and the importance of trying to create a more circular economy and share things, basically, share services and functions. And if we can integrate nature into our cities to a larger extent, so we don't end up with like overheating and flooding, and we need to create a good microclimate by the use of urban green ecosystem services. And that can, of course, also be a pleasure to enjoy. It creates spaces and cities that we can really appreciate and be in and be happy. If we can nudge people to behave a bit better, if we can show them that this is possible, maybe we don't have to regulate everything, but we can still try to show new patterns that would create new qualities that are better sustainably. And using renewable materials, which is not that easy. I mean, the only one I know about is wood or timber. That's the only material we can use, I think, that is really renewable. And if we do a building with 100 apartments in Sweden in timber, I don't know if you know how long that takes the Swedish forest to grow that material. I mean, if you use, effectively, you can use all the trees. Do you know how long that would take? I guess? A year? No, it would take the Swedish forest like 1 minute to grow that building. And trees are so great, you probably know, but all trees work like a carbon trap. So in Sweden, a tree would catch carbon for 70 years, and then you can cut it down, and the carbon would be preserved in it. So we can actually talk about carbon positive buildings if we do them in wood, which I think is fantastic. So at Kjellander Sjo, we tried to work with a method, like a design method. So we did this workbook to handle like process with a lot of people. And so often when we start out as architects or planners, we don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't really have the goals agreed on with everybody involved, like with our clients. We start with a sketch and somebody will think it's good or it's bad. But this is an attempt from us to like really sit down, write by hand, like in a school book, and like summarize and say, yeah, this is the measurable goals we're going to do. And they can be like all sustainable targets, and they can be like for who or who's going to do what. And I think at least a lot of architects I know, I don't know about in this country, but a lot of people always say, so what is sustainability really about? I mean, it's kind of abstract, it's kind of vague, and sometimes that can be an excuse for doing anything or trying to find the most important parameter. And I think if you use these things, if you focus on the resources part, if you focus on integrating nature into what we do, if you talk about the climate, how we can improve the climate and not make it worse, if you focus on like the societal aspect, how we do include people and focus on what society we want to create. Look at the urban fabric, which is as a pattern. I mean, it regulates a lot how we move in cities and what experiences we have and what possibilities we have. And also offering lifestyles that can be more sustainable. I think we have, if we do that, we have a quite sustainable and good product and way forward. In our workspace in Stockholm, it looks like this. This is the main space, and we like to think about our office as a workshop where we can do messy things. We can take out a saw or a hammer and do things together. We can have larger collaborations. We can have big meetings and think tanks. We can have smaller workshop meetings with different teams. And we are a lot of different people in the office. We have a lot of like quite international team with Czech people and a guy from Korea, and we have French and Spanish architects, and this really provides, we don't always understand each other, what we say, but we have developed this kind of pidgin English, so it's not too sophisticated, like everybody should understand what you're saying. So that kind of fits me. Since I'm Swedish, I don't either speak the language as well. We have a lounge and a greenery, or a greenhouse, where we can like relax, meet the whole office for Monday meetings and have communal meals, and think and talk and have informal discussions. We try to do these exchanges a lot, where we invite the public to talks. This talk was about fashion and architecture, how they can like inform each other, and we try to do these different formats. We just had a shop talk last week about the role of public art in the urban space, where we would invite people maybe from the art scene and from different museums. And we have now, since 2 weeks, we have this community bench outside our office. We're really happy to have that. And if you sit there long enough, this guy, Johan, who's in charge of our Malmö office, will come out and buy you coffee and talk about architecture or other interesting things. But what we do, I would say still, we have rural places in Sweden as well, of course. In northern Sweden, you really depend a lot on your car. And of course, it's important to create qualities there as well. But in this talk today, I focus on the city, because still more than half the world live in cities. And I think cities are like the most incredible invention ever, because it's a place where you can collaborate and you can find something to do, you can find a profession, and you can create infrastructure that can be sustainable. You can share the physical space, you can share public transport, you can do things together. But I also think that all cities really have a soul, and it's up to us to like investigate a bit, like what is this city about? What kind of rules have constructed it in the past, like economic systems and models, agreements. And I think our role, as we said before, is more try to improve that, improve the urban fabric so it's more complete and more healthy and more functional than it was before. And of course you can have the other stance as an architect that you focus more on the artistic level of one object or one sculpture. And we don't really agree with that. We try to anchor things in the place where they are. Like this map of London, I think is a great example of urban fabric. And what we mean by that is London is really like built up of typologies that are quite clear. Originally it was like the townhouse in 3 stories. And that kind of gave the city a scale and a width of streets. And you also got like typical sub-typologies of streets like the back alley and the Muse Street. And I think all this is quite fantastic. You also have like different materials like brick that has built up London. And I think that's now when we work in London, I think it's really rewarding to be able to work in the city and add on to that. Also in a Middle Eastern traditional city, like in the Medina, the spatial hierarchy is quite different. You have a lot of the like really public space where you meet and interact within the private realm in the courtyard. And the streets are very narrow, can be very narrow, to protect you from the sun and create a good microclimate. So it would be quite difficult to work in this kind of city if you don't understand what it's doing and what is good with it. But what we like is the sense of the everyday, how we can improve like the everyday life. And it's really fantastic, like how you meet other people on your threshold of your house, but also like the small details like the paving or the windowsill that kind of builds up the common ground and the public realm. And these are some of the fantastic words that we like. I don't know if I'm the only one who understands them, but I really like. It makes me laugh a bit when we talk about things that are local, because it's such a beautiful word, I think. How can it be more local, what we do? How can we add a public luxury? That was an excellent show at the Modern Museum in Sweden recently. Like, I think even we are architects, we always have a client, we always have a tight budget, and sometimes the budget can be an excuse for not doing projects that communicate with the city. You can have a quite bland and monotonous facade, and you can blame it on the client, or you can blame it on the contractor, or you can blame it on the budget. But I think it's up to us to really work hard to kind of sneak these qualities in there, the public luxury aspects, if our clients or society doesn't understand them. So what kind of society do we want, and what kind of society do we need, and who is it for? This is an excellent duo, like two twins from Colombia who founded the fashion brand This Is Sweden in Sweden. And they kind of, as being refugees originally, they question they question what Swedish society is all about and what it should be about. So fashion for them is more to a vehicle to discuss and make a statement and discuss who is Swedish. And they use a lot of patterns like the traditional Swedish birch in their work. And it's really like, so who is Swedish? I mean, of course, we had lots of migration recently, and we need to build like a new identity and discuss what society should really do for all. And we have that tradition, but it's just much harder now since we have more challenges than in a long time. We work in this kind of situation a lot. There's a lot of areas built in the 60s and 70s in Sweden that like built up the welfare state. And this one in Rosendahl in Malmö, where we also work, has been quite problematic with lots of unemployment. And of course, new ways of migration means that people don't stay on that long and maybe don't create as strong ties between each other. And it's quite hard to like have to, so what should we do as architects and planners? I mean, how do we tackle this? And one way we've done this in a small way is try to do exhibitions. Exhibitions for us have been a very good vehicle for doing research and finding new ideas. And Communicate was a discussion about we know we need new community spaces. We know we need new libraries in all different spread out areas of Malmö, for instance. We know, and at the same time, we're sure that nobody's going to build a new library because there's no budget, there's no money for it. We know that the city won't build a new sports hall. So maybe we can allow people to do it for themselves. So we discussed this idea with the former design center in Malmö, and the city of Malmö was there as a financial part. And we came up with this idea of common kits, if we could create instant kits that would kickstart community spirit in areas. This project here is like a library in a new part of Malmö, where the different functions are kind of spread out into different little objects. And the idea being that maybe people living here in the community could build them themselves with the architect and with the city, but the city wouldn't have to finance it. If we can allow that, I mean, we could have these kickstarting devices spread out. And Communicate was, we invited 15 Scandinavian architects to each work on a theme to propose a little idea project for instance, sports or play or religion or shopping or urban farming. And being architects, they were pretty easy to trick, so they accepted. They didn't get a fee. But they did fantastic work. And step 2 that we haven't come to yet is to try to do some of these kits in Malmö with people. It did spur a lot of discussions in the city among people and among architects, which was quite successful, we think. Other exhibitions we've done. We did the Forest of Venice at the Venice Biennale in 2016. And that was an attempt, again, to understand cities. And this time we looked at Venice, which is also, for me, such a perfect city. And why? I think it's like a piece of nature. You can really get lost in Venice. In that way, it's very exciting. It's quiet in the streets, and you can meet other people. It was based also on these clear typologies of the palazzo, where you would have trade at the entrance level by the water, and would have a social space upstairs and residential areas at the top. But Venice is also interesting because we were looking at finding models for how to do cities, and Venice was really founded on sandbanks and reefs that was not really ground. It was very hard to build there, and it was founded by refugees that fled from wars and persecution. So it was like the first refugee camp, but done by people themselves. And it was built, it was founded, and it was destroyed over the years. For 1,000 years, the city was kind of being developed, and at a certain point, there was this engineer model that just happened, that you could find a way to build on the water, and you can find a way for the city to survive from storms. And this exhibition focused on creating new landscapes in Venice, like building it the same way it's always been done, to kind of rescue a bit from the museum spirit that people are also leaving the city because it's so hard to live here. But by doing new islands with green spaces and with new businesses and culture, we can offer a retreat and areas actually to live in. And since Venice was founded on 10 million trees that are still there, like the poles under Venice, the foundations, we thought we could plant 10 million new trees that might absorb some of the climate change and some of the water and offer better air quality. So we again asked seven architects this time to each do a transformation or interpretation urban elements of Venice, like the loggia. And we made them do this. We did this model where the people who did the top didn't know what the people underneath did, sort of like this chilling game where you fold a piece of paper and somebody's doing the torso and somebody's doing the legs. So this is the way it came up. We also did a little pavilion, a small wood palace in the garden. And this pavilion being built in cross-laminated timber shipped from Sweden. And if you do know it, if you're an architect, there are some architects here, you know that cross-laminated timber is very light. So it's very ideal for soil like in Venice, where you don't really have solid ground. And it can be rapidly assembled by the Italian workers who work with were really good, but they never worked with this material. So we can imagine that you can use this material in places where you need new housing quick, or temporary housing, or shelters. So we did this little pavilion where you can like have a conversation and whisper and be like a bit secluded in the walls. And it had a fantastic acoustic, and you can listen to the trees outside and smell the wood, which was quite nice. But we like this idea of telling urban stories, and we could talk about different things, like in the city of Östersund, we were invited to a competition to do a new, very kind of mixed and composed block with a new art center, a city library, a children's library, and a culture school, and hotel, and housing, and a concert hall. And the whole city of Östersund is sloping down towards the big lake, which is called the Big Lake. It has a slope down and is quite exposed for the western winds in winter. But the area is like really composed of these little courtyards that used to have trade and workshops and blacksmiths and horses in the past. We thought we can include that in our project, like using these spaces and having looking at the streets, with the narrow streets with very short facades and small buildings, and we could just do the project like that. And the project is called Gustav III Square. So the notion is it's now a bus square. We wanted to do it still like a square, but with buildings. So we're looking at the basic element. If urban structures are going to work, we have to look at the ground level, we think. So here we like investigate how can you sneak in, how can you move diagonally from this street up to this street, how can you move across through the library, under the foyer and up in the foyer to the concert hall, how can you like wait for your bus, have a cup of coffee, have spaces that are not 100% commercial, but could be inviting for temporary use, and how can you have the hotel foyer and the restaurant for that meeting both the street and the two courtyards inside. So finding this spatial structure that kind of works with the city, and also a project that you from the air don't really see, that kind of blends in with the area. Our competitors, of course, did a tall tower for the hotel, which is sometimes ideal for a hotel because it's cheap and it's rational and you have a view. But the fantastic thing was that we were two competitors, and we, Kjellander Sjo, worked for the city, which is not always rewarding, because if there's a commercial client that want to do a big hotel, usually they're going to get it their way and they're going to win. But the great thing was that we, after the competition, everybody like came to the senses and thought that this spatial structure was quite good. So now we're working together, like the two architecture firms and the city and the developer, to do this project like this. And of course, it will feel new. I mean, the architecture will be new, but the sense of the interweaving of the existing fabric will hopefully be there. In many places we work, in Stockholm and Malmö, we work in quite large development areas, and usually the land is owned by the city. The bigger cities in Sweden usually have a quite large land bank that was built up in the 50s and 60s. So in this project, Årstafältet, we are working by the main square. And the great thing about this process is that we would sit down with the planners, we sit down with sociologists that are coordinators, so and that try to bring this together, like how is this going to work and feel, and how far is it to a park or to public meeting spaces. And we'd have different developers and architects working together and discussing the quality of the neighborhood street or of the main street, the square, the big park leading into this. So when we work with this block, block on the east side, we always think like, so what can this story be about? And here we thought it could be about having a square that you really use also in winter. So we proposed these greenhouses or winter gardens that are open in summer but could be closed off with sliding doors in winter. And of course, having a large building with residential units on top, it's quite hard because you always have something in the way that blocks your kind of feeling of flow through a building and the openness. So trying to remove all the waste and the bin store and everything like that, so you can have an open structure that in winter could look like this from the main street, having shops and these kind of informal winter gardens to connect it. But another urban story could look like this. In this infill project, we were like balancing the older building from the 1870s and the more modern one on the left. And here it's like we thought it was good to have some kind of neutral building, like a black pause in the streetscape. And the plot was quite deep, so we needed to like have lots of glass and cut through apartments that are quite narrow. And we thought that this glazed facade could offer something to the urban context, which is quite bland and open with a lot of parking. And we have the bridge over here, so at night you can really see what the people living here are doing. We hope they are fully dressed, but still it offers something like a glow and a light in the street. Also, this project is about set out to create elderly care homes in southern Sweden. And of course, the budget was quite tight. There was a call for rationality and quick methods to build. It was built by Skanska in Sweden, and it was aiming to be a LEED certificated building. And we knew we were going to work with concrete. And of course, it's not wood, but concrete has fantastic potential. And here, we wanted to work with a sense of finding an identity for the building, that people will recognize it, and uses this kind of knitted facade could kind of tie on to the traditions of perhaps of the people who would live here. We also have a rooftop garden that you can use, and you have a garden at ground level. So you have different spaces to meet, but you don't have to get so far outside the building to experience something if you have a hard time walking and moving around. In other places, it's about maybe supporting the quay and the life that happens on the quay. This is a node in Hammarby Sjöstad in the main development, quite central in Stockholm, where the other buildings on the left and the right were there already. And we inserted these freestanding buildings on a commercial base. We're happy that one quite well-known Swedish boxer and chef opened up this restaurant on the left. And we have a raised podium with a green garden. They can overlook the quay. And the corners are kind of tilted out a bit so that also the units in the back can get a nice view of the water. In other projects like this one in Rosendahl in Stockholm, we work with brick. We have for a long time had a strong affinity for brick. We think it's a fantastic material. It gives this kind of warm quality, and you want to maybe go up to it and touch the wall, and it becomes a bit textile. And here the building shape, kind of kinking down the slope, is connecting the park in the back with the street and having some commercial spaces at ground level, and having the balconies integrated in the corners, and the balconies become like an extra room in your apartment. Also in quite dense spaces like this one in Uppsala, you can have 4 buildings around the court, which is green, and you have these quite friendly materials with timber and curved corners where everybody get a direct relationship to the courtyard. But also in this development in Riddersvik, which is today an apple orchard, we competed with one of our developers to win this site, and we did. And here it's about offering a wide variety of sizes and residential units for different incomes and families. So we would do both row houses and apartments with galleries as an entrance, but try to work with the urban plan, offering a secondary movement from you have the main streets all around it, and then you have little informal sneakways through the buildings, and the orange part being a play street where you can have informal sports and children playing and bicycles. Also like working with the roofs to offer maybe solar panels on the roofs and just have a varied streetscape. In other areas like in Uppsala, which is the university town west of Stockholm, it has one of Sweden's oldest universities. There is this plot, Nya Berg, where today it's owned by the municipality's rental department. So there's around 1,000 apartments here, or all rental apartments. And it's a quite good area. As you saw in this image, it's quite central. The center of Uppsala is up here. And it's a quite good area. People stay a long time and enjoy it. The problem may be that the municipality saw is that they need new housing for students, and they have quite a positive trend that people are moving here. So they would like to double this area, double the amounts of people living here, with the same qualities intact, hopefully, and offering different sizes. Most apartments here are done in the late 60s, so there's a lot of two-room apartments, and they needed a wider range of that. So we said, yeah, we can try that. And we saw the big buildings sort of like big rocks in the landscape. And the low buildings were deemed to be demolished because they were like too run down to be really used for something good. But we offered like new friends to these big guys and said, yeah, we can do this kind of small scale development with townhouses and small apartment buildings. We would keep the lower buildings that were already there, maybe only the foundations or the whole buildings to do things that you usually can't afford to do in the city. So they could be daycare centers, they could be visitor centers, they could be hubs for startups, and they could be senior citizens centers. So we kept that, and we connected the adjacent green areas and the fields with a new urban park in the middle, in the middle. And I think one of the major ideas here was to create streets, still respecting the buildings that are there in a way, letting them be there, but still adding new qualities and defined streets. And one of the main features was this pedestrian route that goes around this, that connects the isolated islands, opens up the kind of one-way cul-de-sacs that are there. And this street would take you about 20 minutes to walk through, and you can bicycle, you can drive, but it's like a slow speed street, and you can do different things there. So it's kind of questioning the notion of that you only have to drive on streets, but you can do different things. Over time, you can have a flexibility to do different things. And hopefully, someday in the park, you can go here and be barefoot and have a sensorial experience with your bare feet in this park. So we think architecture can really be like a fairy tale. We think it is a great place to dream a bit, try new potential, and try new possibilities for society. And sometimes, of course, these dreams comes true, but they're always something else than we think. They're much more than we think, or we can imagine from the drafting table. One building we did that we didn't think would happen because it was a bit complex and seemed like the road to get there was so rough. So Etaget is an infill project in Stockholm, and we thought of it as a mini Manhattan. It's a bit of a cliché maybe for you guys in this country, but we love this notion of Manhattan that is dense, that is high. We thought we could create like a building that connects with the street and the area where it's at, and create kind of a mini community, but still open to the rest of the city. And we love, this is what we liked. We liked this layered kind of silhouette in New York and on Manhattan. This is my hand sketch of Manhattan, if you don't see what city it is. So the building sits on this corner. It's kind of tight. It's a curving street, so it's a bit complex to get there. And the site is very small. And of course, we had a hardcore developer here who thought we had to demolish an industrial building already here. And of course, we couldn't do less square meters than what was already there. So it was tough. It's a very small site, and it's quite disturbed from traffic noise on the top right, sorry. So how can we create qualities in here? If there are some architects here who have worked with floor plans and trying to create these qualities in apartments where you have to kind of go around the corner and almost find like a periscope to like get a view. And we thought we could put the big apartments facing the street with the social spaces, sometimes overlooking the water down the narrow street. We can have smaller one-room apartment and two-room apartments in the back over corners. So this is basically a structure with 2 towers with a central staircase and 5 apartments per tower. So there's a huge variety of sizes, and also these are condominiums. But in Stockholm, you're also supposed to do between 10 to 20% of the apartments for people with special needs. So the local government would rent these from this I don't know the word. It's called bostadsrättsförening in Swedish, but anyway, they would rent them. So we saw the building as a kind of a collage. We thought that was a nice way to express. I mean, there will be lots of different families that will live here, and we thought that could be beautiful. That it could have a sense of verticality, stepping down the streets, but we can articulate different shops and volumes at the bottom. And we thought by using different types of bricks burnt differently, and sheet metals with different alloys, we can get there to get this kind of feeling of a building that maybe been there for a long time because all the windows are the same, but still it's something new with this collage character. We focus a lot on the street level again, and we stole some of the features from London, where you can have a brick part of the building coming down to meet the street that you just paint black, or you paint it red, or you paint it racing green. And we did manage to fill it with a new deli and a restaurant and a flower shop and an office and a pokeball place. But also, of course, when we do things that look a bit complex and probably cost some money to do, we still need that notion of being rational at a base level. So here it was like the expectation to do a 13-story building in this setting. It wasn't like self-evident. The city planners in Stockholm weren't super enthusiastic about that to start with. But then we did it like this, so you can still read the roof. There's this like rooftop that kind of connects it at a lower level, and then you have more levels stepping back and stepping up to 13 stories in the back. So we think it still created a street environment where the buildings don't like fall on top of you, but it's still a quite pleasant street to be in. And from a distance, it is quite of a humble landmark still. This is a plan showing the building from the top, because of course these steppings could be used to create different roof gardens, which I will come back to. Interior-wise, the apartments are usually like an open social space. like a studio. And you see at the far end there, you see one of the balconies. There were a set of balconies. Some of them are like this, more like internal orangery, and some are like open balconies but withdrawn within the facade. So when you get up to the communal terrace, there are two at the top. You also get a glimpse of people's private life. Behind that wood screen there is a guy who has his outdoor shower there, so he can have his sunbathing in summer. I haven't seen him yet, but I think he's doing that. The nice thing about I think about the roof garden is that it consists of these smaller spaces where you can meet with your family or your friends, and you can be a bit secluded or social with other people. And the little building on the right has a kitchen, and it's always used like for work meetings or for a dinner. Each time I've been there, even in the middle of winter when it's snow, there's people sitting there and working or talking. And you get great views of the city, of course. All right, so how can we make people behave a bit better and have more sustainable lifestyles? Of course, we need to support the frame to do that and the possibilities. This project in Sjöberg Park was a competition, the Nordic Built Cities Challenge, and the question was, in general, how can we create like better models for that? So we focused on doing more co-living and more like a building with shared amenities and shared surfaces. If we could shrink, which we did, we shrunk the kind of typical habitable space by 30 to 40%. So where the apartments are smaller, but the communal spaces are bigger. And we did calculate the total life cycle cost from an environmental perspective. But that means not only like how much water you spend, how much heat you spend, how much energy, but it also means like how much do you travel, what do you buy, what do you eat, what do you consume. It was a quite complex calculation. We got some help. And we proposed this structure, and our motto was like, it takes a block. So by that we mean, if you're going to do a sustainable city, it really takes like one block, or at least one set of principles that you can work with. So this is our attempt to do that, and we envisioned then in this competition that we would have lots of different housing and dwelling types. Like we have the existing building on the left, which we think could be renovation cooperatives at first, being a simple way to do it, quick and an affordable way. And we think we would have co-living and affordable rental apartments and condominiums and student apartments, and all in one block. And like by using the roofs and the garden and the entrance balconies, it becomes quite sociable on different levels. But the main thing was, of course, to like think about the principles. What could we do? This is the Nordic Built Cities Charter, or a way to try to use that. So by introducing these things and solving them, like the urban arboretum, which is already there, the trees that are there, can we introduce like farming in this block? Can we like do more like integrate a lot of programs and find flexible but rational solutions to that? So like by localizing these different functions that are communal in the building, we could have a communal laundry center at the top where you can hang your clothes outdoors, and you can have a water center for, you can have your sauna with your family on the top, and you can have different concierge functions at the entrance. We think we could do it. So we won that competition in Sweden. We were finalists for the Scandinavian one, but we didn't win that. But now we're working on a project on this site with a client. And of course, with one client, it takes a block. It's really like, it takes a lot of small-scale developers to do different types in one block. But we think we can use these principles more on a grander level, even if we don't build it exactly like that. So one other residential building we're doing is the Woodhouse Rosendahl, which was an attempt to also do like quite sustainable development with wood. And the situation is that it's located on the main square, which is on the top, and the main street on the left, and the neighborhood street on the right. And instead of closing the block off totally, we created this green garden that can absorb rainwater, like 100 years water in the middle. And then when it's 200 years rain, which happens every 2 years now, it can like swell over its borders and run out in the street instead of damaging the property. And also here we want to do a bit of a complex exterior in the city, but we need a rational base still. So by repeating different or the same type of apartments many ways, like using them, turning them, we could still have a rational starting point for that. And this is the block facing the square with the main street with the new tram that is coming. And we use these different stains and treatment for the wood facades, like dark tar and pigmented oil for the brown, and some natural wood like cedar for where we have balconies that they are protected anyway already. And we felt that Uppsala, this is also in Uppsala, is such a great city with wooden architecture and all wood buildings in the center, and we wanted to connect to that. And we wanted to connect a sense of an architect that had been there a long time. So we wanted to create this kind of authenticity with it, which is superficial because we created it. It's kind of like a new bought pair of jeans that are already worn. We didn't get the old logo on the fire gable, but otherwise we'll do the facades like this with smaller shops, that are encouraged to spill out on the sidewalk, and really encouraging like people to use the sidewalk in an informal way. I mean, we don't have anymore. I mean, a lot of cities in Europe, at least, are developed from the notion of men in hats and walking canes, and now, I mean, now it's about like you want to move things out into the street, and you want to play in the street, and you want to be able to ride your horse in the street. In the courtyard, we did this workshop space for even if you have a small apartment, you can still repair your bookshelf or repair your bike, and you can have chicken and hens and children playing in the courtyard. So this is where it's at now. We're looking at the tests for the wooden facades and the wood shingles and how they will be and how we should stain them. I would just say something briefly about this project. We are working now in the harbor of Malmö, where there's a new urban sector being built. There's all these old wharf buildings that were done in the 1850s to the 1930s. And we're working with this one, where they used to cast steel and steel parts for boats and submarines, which was a fantastic, really like a vibrant environment in the past where people worked and did things. And the building is quite difficult to preserve because it has no roof today and has a fantastic steel structure that used to carry things. You see the bowls for the sand in the roof. And we looked at how to protect this one. I mean, how can we like even save the brick facades because they're so damaged by frost and water? So we are finding a way to do that. But most of all, it's landing in new context that you see in this one. Like it connects both to the kind of interior, the space around the dock, which is a bit more like the community space. And then you have grand quay space, which has been developed, and then 2 new residential buildings on either side. And we, of course, wanted to open up and invite people, create functions that could be shared and enjoyed by everyone, but still doing this with one client, one taker for the whole building. And we were really happy that it was this company that does oat milk that is kind of trying to be a very sustainable example for all that is the taker of this building. And we thought by combining oat and wood, we can really do something fantastic here. So we propose these hanging structures in timber that are lightweight. They can rest on the existing steel, almost having a sense of being movable. And then we can add some platforms that stand on the floor and have a very lightweight kind of foundation in them. And this creates kind of a subspace structure within the big hall that preserves the big hall, but still offers like a spatial definition between different departments in this company. And there will be no milk bar, so people can come in here and have coffee and maybe talk to the people working here and just sit down and work on your laptop, keeping the transparency of this. I will skip this product and take the next one, this one. This is a proposal for a new museum in Norway. And it's for the forest Finns, which was the forest Finns were people that migrated from Finland, from the Swedish parts in Finland to Sweden, northern Sweden, and to Norway. And their trade was really to work with the forest and burn forest and create open fields for rye and wheat production. And there's a strong pride and presence in this area where there's a lot of old historical buildings. But what was needed was like an educational center and the possibility to do new exhibitions and interact with this community here. So we propose something which is basically integrated a bit in the forest. Basically, one main roof that kind of hovers above the ground, and the fields outside. So what we thought was quite strong was this idea of like burning wood, just burning everything down. And this was of course common before the price of wood went up. The existing buildings across the road are still there. They're used as an outdoors museum, and you can go in here. And one fantastic aspect was that to clean these houses in summer, you would heat the fire and really fill the whole building with smoke. So not fog, but smoke. So you can imagine it kind of smelled really nice in there. And of course they had many smoke saunas and stuff like that as well. But we thought this notion of this village and the burnt trees and the rye could be really interesting to work with. So we proposed a structure where it kind of sits in a section, it kind of is dug into the slope, and it has a dark burnt floor, and it has a light kind of wooden structure that reminds us of the forest a bit, and has a kind of mystical light coming down from above, which also is kind of reminiscent of the smoke, we think. And the plan is like these cubes or these huts placed on this ground, and you can move between them, sort of like in the village. And then the spaces indoors and outdoors has the same hierarchy. So the outdoor spaces are used a lot for school classes, visiting and education outdoors. And you have to imagine this place then with maybe 2 meters of snow in front. So you need this heavy eaves that comes out and protects the facade and builds a quite special space. Yes. So these two projects are not so much about cities, but I will show you also this development in a village. How can you develop kind of a village structure? So we've been fortunate to work in England, and this place, High Wycombe, not well known to everybody, is between Oxford and London. And by coincidence, we kind of landed here. And the task was to provide new housing on this site. It's a fantastic site. It's something, we have some natural preserves like this in southern Sweden that reminds us of this, but it's more beautiful and it's hilly. And the fantastic thing is these hedgerows that kind of structure the site and breaks the wind and kind of trying to hold the soil in place. It's a chalk valley, so the soil layer is very thin. So one mission with this project was to to increase the biodiversity, because it's kind of monoculture right now. But how can we do this, like adding 1,000 new homes and shops and things without totally destroying this sense of place, which is fantastic. High Wycombe has some really nice old architecture with stone buildings and churches. And of course, it's a collection of smaller villages that have been built, connected gradually over the years. And each one of them, of course, has like 4 pubs, which is a main feature here in England. And this kind of sense of scale would be fantastic to like integrate in the new. And like these materials, like they are quite local with different types of stone, like this one. There was a public hearing. I don't know if you have the series here, the Midsummer Murders. Do you get that here? The British TV series, the Midsummer Murders. It's about these smaller villages where there's always a murder occurring. And I felt a little bit like that when I went into this public hearing. Because, of course, as a Swedish architects, there were a couple of people who are pro-Brexit. And they were a bit questioning, why should we have a Swedish architect? We have so many excellent British architects here. But people were very nice. I didn't get a hay fork in my back when I walked out. They had lots of good ideas, and of course they were concerned because this is really in their backyard, and it has to be a really good quality development. And I think the ambition of the whole group was to do something really unique in England, like one of the best places to visit in England. So the stake was high. Our client Jonathan on the left there, his company is called Human Nature, and he really works from a set of sustainable principles. So we developed the master plan together, us, another architecture company, May Architects, and the landscape company, Periscope Architects. So we developed this master plan, which is kind of meandering down the really steep topography to create a sense of a main street or a high street. And the whole development is then connected through the main street, but then there's these different characters, these different villages walking down the hill. And we focused, at Kjellander Sjo, we focused on the urban village, which is a bit denser, which would have the community spaces. So we looked at coming up the main street, up the hill. So we looked at how could that meet like a square, how can we get people here? So you would drive over the one side of the square and continue. And you see there's a wildlife preserve here on the right, and there's a hedgerow here and a hedgerow on this side. And you get to the square, and when you leave the square, you go through the hedgerow and get to the green square. So we thought the square could look a bit like this, working with quite small scale structure for us, where we have a school with a schoolyard spilling out into the green square with gardening for the children and greenhouses and a sport facility in the back and some elderly housing. There's a little pavilion for concierge where you can get your e-bike key or code, and you can get your carpool keys in that location. There's a restaurant and there's a general store, we think. And it could look like this. And when you go through the hedgerows north, we have this like open community destination that will be used in summer, where you can start your hikes and go up the valley in summer. You have a dansbana, you have somewhere to dance with a roof on it, and you have a culture shed. And you have these like just very basic buildings that can be used by the community for different purposes. You have a pond which would collect the day water from up the hill, and it would overswell in summer. And it can look like this when it's done on a beautiful day. So the last project I'm going to show you is a bit more urban. It's called Nakaput, and this was also an invited competition we won. We're now in the planning phase for that, so planning application on its way. But it was like, how can we create a destination? Quite many dwellings, around 340. And we thought that could like become a city within a city as well, if we can offer like market spaces and we can offer things to do there except to live. So we would like to create this city within a city with a vibrant urban life. It has one building already, like this plant they used to manufacture tile. And there's like 40 to 50 artists residing there now and working there. And there will be a fantastic story to like keep and bring into this new development. New development that tends to be quite bland at first before it kind of settles. But also like to have people here like all day, all 24 hours. And the site and the building we thought of could be like, we call this a clint, so it's a steep mountain with a steep drop on one side. It's located in the middle of a quite difficult freeway structure. So the question we had to answer is like, why would people actually buy apartments here when they can live anywhere in Stockholm? So it has like a heavily trafficked road on one side and has it like also like south-north here. You leave Stockholm, this is Stockholm, and you go out to the municipality of Nacka. And we thought today is such a fantastic place. People are, again, welding and doing things. And we kind of like that notion that you have spaces that you may use. You don't only look at them. And the image on the right is something it could be. It could be a combination of these great places to hang out and manufacture things at the same time. So we started from the bottom, kind of from the street, and try to do new programming, like with the art square, and I will go through this quickly. We thought if you can create places like this, where you just move out your carpet and you bring your dog and sit down and have a beer, or you play some soccer games with a roof over it, it could be like a really nice, fantastic place. So we kept going with this programming, looking at the green spaces that are there surrounding this. The park will be renovated on, and we try to add a new on the ground, but kind of like a highline structure here, where we had to construct new landscapes. And we looked at the courtyard in the middle here as an open kind of square with green things in it, but still like a square more than a private courtyard. And we continued with this and envisioned workshops and bicycle culture and everything. So when it's done, it could be like really full of different activities in life, and of course a market for food. The fortunate thing here is that in the area there's a lot of people already working. There's a big court building next to it, and with the artists there will be like a possibility to have these commercial functions, and people could sit there and in the market and work during the day as well. So starting by doing architecture from the existing building, the plant, and like adding new volumes to that with the same kind of language, and not making one tower, but making like a tower that has different, that looks different from different views and acts differently. And we thought if you do a 30-story building, which was the brief, how can you make that into a symbol of something? Because landmarks always become a symbol, like it or not. And we thought this could be a symbol of the future, hopefully, where we could provide for ecosystem services like bees and birds on these terraces, and people could grow their own things on the terraces. And we think by doing this shape coming down, like facing south, creating a good microclimate on the terraces, and also connected to the park you saw in the southeast here. It could be a nice shape, and on this one you also see that it's opening up. We have a tram going past here and a bicycle path, and you can bicycle and walk into the courtyard and continue under the road here to the next part of Stockholm. And this is the view that you meet when you leave Stockholm and enter the city of Nacka. So from a distance, it kind of reminds you of a mountain or of a piece of nature in a way. But also, how could we balance the carbon footprint? We talked to our statistical engineers, and they were like, no, I don't think you can do this 30 stories in timber. Nobody's done it. The tallest building in the world used to be a Swedish building that was 9 stories. But I think somebody surpassed us in Canada, I think. And now, if they're right, I mean, they're planning skyscrapers in Japan. I don't think it will happen because you will add so much wood, so it's like, the question is if you have any space left inside. But still, we wanted to try to do it in timber, and we thought, still, if we do 1/3 or half in timber, we would still balance the carbon footprint. Usually it takes like, if you build 8 buildings and build 1 in timber, you can count the kind of carbon positiveness. So we thought if you do the base, maybe half, or maybe 2/3 in concrete, so that you would anchor the building. You get the heaviness where you want it, close to the ground, so the building doesn't fall over. Then it would be okay. So that's the kind of ambition or the plan right now, to do parts of it in concrete and parts of it in timber. But also the good thing was to have 2 towers, is that the people who probably buy the most expensive apartments on top, they will have a neighbor, so they will have somebody they can wave to up there or choose to ignore. And you will get a good view of Stockholm anyway when you're up there. Yeah, so I think that's the last slide. So I just think that it is fantastic to keep trying to do this. I mean, as an architect, you can never give up. You can just keep moving and try to like sneak in these qualities and the public luxuries in the work you do. All right, thank you.
So my first question in looking at these is a little bit more on the on the mundane side, but it has to do with how do you how does a relationship between the architect and the developer play out in the environment in which you're doing these projects? It seems like you have some really inspired work, especially with regards to how sustainability is factored into that. And I think our American model is to struggle with our developer sensibilities of cutting costs and just getting to the point of building square footage for lease and the like. It sounds to me like there's a bit more support in the world that you're working in that we may be familiar with here. And just wanted to ask, you know, where does your, are you teamed with the developer in every instance, or are you, you know, how did, expand a bit.
I mean, I can't really compare since I never worked in the States, unfortunately. But so I don't know like exactly how it works here. But I think in a general sense, you need to make the clients love your ideas and love you as an office, that they think they're doing really good things. Like in the last one in Acapulco, in the tall tower, we were fortunate that there was a competition, and both the planners or the city really liked our ideas, and the client was really happy as well. So then maybe you have some kind of space to do a different shape or different typology or different strategy than you would do in a standard project. But still, I think in Sweden we always struggle with, we usually work for the developer, and then we have a lot of big, which we call a total contractor, that has a quite strong position in all our projects. And the best projects I think we do when everybody's on board early on, so that you don't get this gap where you have to guess or jump off the cliff and you don't know who's going to build this. And you want a close dialogue with everybody. And I think usually we say that the city is our most important client. I mean, the people we meet at the planning office and the politicians and everybody, I mean, they're most important client, because that's the longest continuity in a way. And we have to please, the buildings have to work for everybody in the city. But I still think, of course, there is always a struggle then in some projects where you start working with a contractor, and since a lot of the responsibility is handed over to the contractor for the long-term performance of the building, there is a discussion about costs. Early on, there is a discussion about maybe you can increase the turnover by adding 10 stories or adding a better quality. And later on, it's only about costs in a way. So it's really important to have that kind of documentation of what was the early on ambition and aims, and what did we achieve in this phase. But I think we probably have. I think when we're working in London with some pretty good clients, but it always comes down to that bottom line, like how much that is cost and what do we gain, and hopefully these two could meet. But I think there's also a tendency, as you said, about the statically engineer how to do it. I mean, there's always a problem with, there's some engineers that are really good at steel, and there's some people that are really good at concrete. And it's hard to get like both, like what is the optimal way to do this building.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. You started talking about the street and the change, or I don't know if it's a change, but it was more reaffirming the importance of the street plays as far as collective space, I guess is a better word. Also, is it, the way I was looking at it, drifted into how you developed courtyards and personal spaces between buildings as well. So how is that changing? Is that change you're in front of, or is that in the Swedish culture specifically? Is that something that's being, I've noticed, for example, the automobiles are being removed as a primary, and it's being pushed, and the pedestrian and the bicycle and the mass transportation. So are you driving, is that driven from the society pushing that, or is that something you feel design is pushing that change?
I think that's a question we've always been really interested in, and we had some think tanks about the street. I think we had the planning office from New York was present once because they were in Stockholm. So they took part in this discussion about the street, how to find new guidelines and how to improve the planning of streets. But I think, so it's an interest, but then I think like the city of Stockholm is pushing very much like new qualities in streets. So, and I think what has changed it is really to have a common strategy from the city about mobility. So that's the new mobility strategy for Stockholm that says the top priority should be people walking, and then bicycling, and then public transport, and then cars. And probably first like carpool cars and then private cars. So it's really, it is a change that has come about, which is a big shift. And not only in Sweden, I think in many parts of Europe. And so we would look at planning in different projects from like maybe 1 car for 10 units, housing units, or like up to 5 cars per 10 housing units. So very few cars. But then of course, there is usually a quite good public transport net already. But still, I mean, that means that it has to be safe and nice to move by foot or by bicycle in the city. If it's not, then we have problems. So for instance, the bicycle lanes are quite nice now. It's getting better and better, at least. They're freed of snow in the winter, so you can use a bike all year round. And of course, Denmark is better than Sweden. I think 70% in Copenhagen, 70% of the travels are to work or to education space is done by bike. So I think we are down, in Stockholm, I think it's around 40 maybe, or 45, which is quite good, but still not there. But so I think it's a shift, and that affects everything. Like we used to think of parking and planning parking under the courtyard usually, or in the garage. But now that seems also a bit unsustainable, because if we will have less cars, what do we use these basements for? So now we tend to try, I mean, like here, we try to do more parking garages, but we call them M houses. So we would have like a front facing the street, maybe with student housing or smaller apartments, and then we would have a commercial ground level, and then going up a ramp with a car from the ground level and parking, and then maybe a recreation, like a roof you can use for different activities.
So really quick follow-up. So the ideal city of Venice, you tagged that as a, so do you see these cities such as Stockholm and Copenhagen and Oslo, I think, is headed that direction. The model is to head towards more of a Venice experience as far as the way the city should be expressed.
I hope so. I mean, you need to be able to move around, and we probably won't get rid of all the cars, but still, like the project in Uppsala, the Berg, where we talked about this loop for like a play street and a shared street. This housing company had ideas really early on to have these small driver-free vehicles, like small buses without a driver. They could pick up people and deliver them at a bigger bus station. And so I think there's a lot of ideas that you can actually use. And I just think it's a waste in general that you just do one thing, you drive on the street where you could do different things on it, and you can garden or whatever. You can have art installations and so. But of course, it's a tricky. You need to deliver goods. You need to get rid of the waste, and you need to do different things. But I think there's a middle ground there that kind of works quite well.
So I appreciate that you talked about climate change, because in Alaska we're dealing with things like ground thawing that was never, that was frozen before and now it's thawing. And so you mentioned the 200-year water that now you say is every second year. I don't know if you were being flippant, joking, but
yeah,
like,
a little bit. I was exaggerating a bit, but it feels like it's every second year.
But how do you see climate change affecting architecture in your country?
The biggest signs of climate threat we had now is probably the burning forests in summer. Like last summer, we had the first time ever we needed to get support from the southern European countries. It usually is the other way around. So we had the drought. Early on I think when I studied here and when going different places, like using less water is a big issue, but it's never been an issue in Sweden until now. Now in April this year, it's really dry actually, and we have some forest fire in April, which we never had in the past. So I think the forest, we have a lot of forests as you do, and they are burning now, and that's a big shift. So but I think also the discussion has changed from like looking at how we can make our cities safe from climate change, and I don't think there is a way to do that. I think you have to try, but still you have to go to like really try to solve the real problem, which is that the climate is changing. It's nice with changing weather, but changing climate should make us very, very uncomfortable. Terrified. So I think we had to look at what we do, and that is really affecting the climate. So of course we had to make our cities safer for storms and things like that, but I don't think we can make them safe enough, quite frankly. But I think also where it's, affecting what we do, I think the whole like planning and the legislation is like changing. So you have to prove that your buildings are more carbon neutral and fossil free soon. I think in London it's 2030, I think. So that is quite soon. So I think the whole system is changing, and we see that, I don't know if you do that here, if you have a competition for land transfers, and we have land banks, so the city would sell a piece of land to a developer. So now they can choose the best developer, which is more sustainable, and you can prove you have different system for getting points for different activities. So you can maybe, if you have, like the one in Uppsala that we are building now, the wood house Rosendahl, that one we had a wood frame and we did these different things, so we won that competition because of that. So I think there's different initiatives you can have as a city. If the city doesn't own the land, of course, maybe it's more difficult, but still I think there's ways to promote more sustainable developments. I think I'm not sure if I'm right, but I usually tend to think that you have to regulate it a bit, actually, because I don't think it happens by itself. Because it seems like the consumers or the people buying apartments now are getting more aware, but we are not really there yet. So I think it's good that our government or the society in general puts these limitations on what we can do. I heard the mayor in New York just banned the glazed skyscrapers, so will. So I think that's a good sign in this country.
Kind of a follow-up, semi-related question to that, and that kind of goes into a conversation we had earlier today about immigration and immigration as fallout from climate change in other parts of the country or of the world. And this is particularly interesting to me because we're facing many of the same climate change related issues here in Alaska with our emerging drought and announcement of major forest fire risk up in South Central in the last week, which is a full month ahead of schedule for that here in Alaska. We're seeing the same type of conditions imperiling people in our southern states and southern countries, and you know, there's a point I would think that we're going to see some movement of people to northern countries, and I think that you're experiencing that a little bit in Sweden now as a fallout of wars, and you know, and many of those conditions are rationally a byproduct of what's happening with the environment in other parts of the country, as well as politics and the like. But in any event, my thought on this, and as we're looking at these projects and looking at a fine-tuning of living to a collaborative kind of relationship between people, and how we live in higher densities and the like, it would seem that the two kind of go hand in hand in a way, and that may be a vehicle for handling an influx of people into your region. Is that an assumption on my part? Is that somewhat correct in terms of what you're experiencing in Sweden, or is it something that is an idea but maybe isn't really panning out that way?
No, I mean, I can't say that we really dealt with the full effects of migration in Sweden yet. I mean, I am probably, or there's politicians, we are struggling because I don't think we found the right models yet. I mean, I think like Venice was a fantastic model in that way, that you could build a city yourself. And I mean, I'm not sure if that's good, but there's also these towns like on Sicily maybe, where you can actually let people use an existing city which has no population anymore, and you can use it for migration use, and you can farm locally, and you can like use a real city. I think what has happened in Sweden is also that we build, because we had so many people arriving and we had no accommodation, so there was also a lot of, and still is, quick accommodation built, which is not that sustainable. I mean, it's not done in a sustainable way, and it doesn't create real city environments. It creates very like isolated suburbs, and so I don't think we are not. I don't think we have the solution yet. We don't know exactly how to do this, but I think the collaborative environments where you can share things would be a good way to do it, because you could imagine that you have different sizes and you share some things and you actually meet. I think an important thing is that if you have these isolated areas that are not integrated, you never meet, and I mean, all sorts of problems will arise, like we have poorer schools in some area that are not really working, and so we have that, and we haven't really solved the problem. I can't say that. And the same thing, I mean, we haven't done any truly sustainable building in our office, and I don't think anybody in Sweden has, because it's so difficult. It's like doing a car with all these components and try to do it in a sustainable way that you can take it apart and put it back to the loop. I think it is very difficult. But we had to try to get there, I think. Otherwise, we won't get there.
I want to thank you again for coming all this way to share your work and visions with us.
Thank you for listening and coming.